Victoria. Her empire ruled a quarter of the world's population, but she was once a passionate, excitable young girl. A girl who had to battle to become queen. While researching my book on Victoria, a forgotten story emerged of her epic struggle to come to the throne. It's a story of greed and power played out in royal palaces and some of Britain's greatest buildings. It's also a story of a bankrupt monarchy redeemed. This is a film about the torturous early life of the most powerful little girl in the world. King George III was a popular monarch who came to the throne in 1760. Farmer George fathered 15 children, 9 sons and 6 daughters. His court was famously bourgeois, family-centred and dull. But by 1817, the king was insane and locked away at Windsor. The future of the crown was in doubt. His sons and heirs had grown into selfish playboys who drank too much, had scores of illegitimate children and were running up enormous debts. The king's eldest son, George, was appointed Prince Regent, ruling over the country while his father was incapable. Prinny was also the only son who had managed to father a legitimate heir to the throne, his daughter, Princess Charlotte. Unlike her father, she was much loved by the people, the great hope for the future of the monarchy. She set up a happy home at Claremont House in Surrey, but here events took a disastrous turn. Aged just 21, Princess Charlotte died tragically in childbirth. The death of Charlotte brought the country close to revolution, but out of the tragedy of Charlotte's death comes this incredible story of struggle and success of a young princess who was passionate, vibrant and determined to fight for the throne. With the young heiress Charlotte dead, George's brothers took centre stage. Those next in line to the throne were the Duke of York, the Duke of Clarence, the Duke of Kent, and the Duke of Cumberland.
When Charlotte dies in childbirth, this is the starting pistol for the baby race, because all the other brothers, all the other sons, now have to make legitimate marriages.
So there was an absolute panic for everybody to acquire a legitimate wife and acquire a legitimate child who could be heir to the throne of England.
And people were joking about it, even at the time. There's one poem I really like. It's by Peter Pindar. Do you know this one? It goes, "Hot and hard each royal pair are at it hunting for the heir."
The fourth son of the king was Edward, the Duke of Kent. Of all the dukes, he was considered by many to be the best of a bad bunch, although he too had a long-term mistress. But now he set his sights on a young widow, Princess Victoire, from the tiny German principality of Saxe-Coburg. They were married in the summer of 1818. He was 50, she was just 32.
Well, she was born a Coburg, very powerful family ruling an incredibly tiny principality. And then she gets this rather flattering offer from the Duke of Kent, and this brings her into the English royal family, which is obviously a step up. But it's a risk, isn't it? Because she's got independence, she's got her life sorted out, really, and she takes the risk. And I feel kind of sorry for her, really, because although she's entering the English royal family, they don't want her. She's German.
Barely 2 months after their wedding, the Duke and Duchess of Kent left London to live in Germany. The Duke was in severe financial difficulties, and the move was a desperate attempt to save money. They arrived here in the Palace of Ammerbach in central Germany, then a cold and modernised ruin, miles from civilization. The Duchess was happier in her beloved Germany, and the Duke relished the chance to renovate a new property, consequently getting himself deeper and deeper in debt. The pair settled into a happy life here in the palace and soon had one piece of excellent news. The Duchess was pregnant. To prove that the child really was legitimate, it was imperative that the birth was witnessed by key members of the British establishment. So with the Duchess 8 months pregnant, she and the Duke had to collect their belongings and race back to London.
The Duke of Kent applied to his brother, the Prince of Wales, Prinny. He wanted money to come to England. The Prince of Wales refused. So they set off in this sort of procession, really, this sort of parade, this rather scuzzy parade of, you know, fountains and landaus. And in fact, the Duke of Kent himself drove just to save money. 470 miles, something like that, across potholed roads with an inexperienced coachman and a 7-month pregnant Duchess. So it was a pretty nasty thing.
The party arrived in Calais on the 18th of April and then drummed their heels waiting for the weather to improve. The Duchess breathed deeply and held on. Finally, 6 days later, they embarked on the royal yacht for England. After 3 hours of rough seas, they arrived here in Dover and then set off for Kensington Palace. On the 24th of May, 1819, the Duchess of Kent gave birth to a baby girl, here in Kensington Palace. The new baby was described as being a pretty little princess, as plump as a partridge. But when the regent heard that his brother had now produced an heir to the throne, he was furious. He turned the christening into a farce, vetoing all the family's regal-sounding chosen names. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood with the child by the font, waiting to be told what to call her. The regent was determined that the Kent's baby would never be queen, so he refused to give her a royal name. Finally, he declared, "Give her the mother's name," and so the little girl became the first person in England ever to be called Victoria. The royal world that Victoria was born into was a rapidly changing one. Under her grandfather, King George III, the monarchy had enjoyed widespread popularity. But under the despised Prince Regent with his profligate brothers, the once popular royal family seemed a thing of the past.
People were very worried about the future of the monarchy, about the political future. There was growing claims for political reform. The French Revolution was still in people's minds. So all of these things were playing out, and playing out very much in a kind of public sphere of newspapers. Caricaturists were pillorying the elite. So I think it was anxious times in many ways for Britain in those years.
A lot of the royal dukes, these what Victoria came to call later her disreputable or her disgraceful uncles, they were all in debt. They gambled, they borrowed money from their friends, they took out loans, they were profligate, and yet, of course, they felt they were of the royal blood, so they thought they had some sort of expectations of how they should live, so they got deeply in debt.
The Duke of Kent was massively in debt, just like his brothers. In a bid to save money, he moved his new family to this house, then a damp, cold cottage by the sea. They arrived here on Christmas Day with Princess Victoria just 6 months old. The Duchess spent her time walking on the seafront and practicing her English. But the Duke was less content. The debts were mounting, and he decided that come springtime they should all move back to Germany. But before the Duke could put his plan into action, events in Sidmouth sent little Victoria's life in an entirely different direction. The Duke of Kent took long walks on the beach in the pouring rain, often returning to the cottage soaked to the bone. He soon caught a cold and did not recover. By 12th of January, Victoria's father was seriously ill. Delirious, vomiting and suffering from chest pains, he had to be propped up even to breathe.
After the Duke of Kent took to his bed, obviously the local doctor was called in, and immediately he recommended cupping, which really involved taking a heated cup, making a cut in the skin and placing the heated cup over it, and then as the cup cooled it would create a vacuum that would draw increasing amounts of blood. This was repeated time and time again with the Duke, taking out several litres of blood over several days. The Duke had a strong constitution, but the cupping and the constant bleeding must have taken so much blood out of his system that ultimately it must have hastened his end.
The dying Duke summoned the strength to ask for his will to be drawn up. In it he appointed the Duchess sole guardian of Victoria. On being told that his signature was legible, he fell back against the pillows. Next morning, the Duke died, holding his Duchess's hand. Princess Victoria was now fourth in line to the throne. She and her mother were brought back from Sidmouth and into the royal fold in London. Within days, the infant Victoria would move even closer to the throne. Her grandfather, King George III, who'd been ill for so long, finally passed away. At the death of George III, the entire nation went into mourning. Thousands of people attended his funeral here in St George's Chapel. He had lost America and sired a clutch of useless children, but his plain speaking had charmed his people, and his struggle with illness had won their sympathies. They grieved for him, and they dreaded the regent becoming king. Victoria was now third in line to the throne. King George IV wanted the Duchess of Kent and her baby out of the way. Deep in debt and frightened of the new king, the Duchess began to rely on a handsome and persuasive young Irishman called John Conroy, previously the Duke of Kent's equerry. With the Duchess all alone, he seized his opportunity to influence her and her daughter Victoria.
Well, Conroy, I think, wasn't good news. I mean, Conroy was an unscrupulous sort of Irish person that got into the household and was on the make, wasn't he? And really he seized his opportunity. In 1820, the Duke of Kent died, the princess's father, and he kind of moved in, didn't he? He moved in on the Duchess of Kent, you know, who wasn't exactly Einstein for a start. And he obviously saw a way to controlling the way things could go.
He was supposed to be quite a charming man. He was quite a persuasive man. He was quite a talker. He was actually quite a crude man and quite a sort of rough man, and he was very ambitious, and in the end he turned out to be very, very manipulative.
He felt that he could really end up as the kind of Svengali figure behind the future Queen.
For the Duchess of Kent and John Conroy, Victoria's succession was vital. They knew the little princess was now their ticket to unlimited riches and power.
Victoria herself was a real little terror, wasn't she? I can see that she must have been a real handful because she had such a strong and determined character. But she had this really weird upbringing because she was so heavily controlled, looked after. She was the focus of attention. She was her mother's meal ticket. She spent most of her time with adults. The only girls that she was allowed to play with were the daughters of the evil Sir John Conroy. So she was living in a sort of curious prison.
Victoria's earliest memory was of crawling on a yellow carpet here in Kensington Palace. She was told that if she cried, her Uncle Sussex, who lived next door, would come and punish her. Typically, defiant little Victoria responded by screaming loudly every time she saw him. As the Duchess of Kent said, the little mouse gathered early to see the royal wedding. It was a measure of just how popular the new monarch was in the eyes of her subjects. At 12:30, Victoria left the palace and drove through the rain and cheering crowds to meet her bridegroom. At the Chapel Royal, 12 bridesmaids carried her 6-foot train, and she was resplendent in white and roses. It was Victoria's wedding day, but she still could not forgive her mother. As she left the chapel, she stooped to kiss Queen Adelaide, but merely shook hands with the Duchess.
Marrying, of course, meant that she was able to remove her mother from the household. It was perfectly proper for her to live with her husband and not have her mother there. So, in a sense, it was the final act of separation from her mother. It sounds very odd to be the Queen of England and need to separate from your mother, but I think that that was the case. And after that, of course, the Duchess did not live with her and really had absolutely no role at all.
This incredible story, the bitter struggle between the most powerful little girl in the world and the woman who wanted that power, ushered in the modern era. Victoria left behind the debauched, self-indulgent, corrupt monarchs of the Regency period and became the first people's queen. The country would never be the same again. If you'd like to discuss any issues raised in the programme, go to our OU-hosted website at bbc.co.uk/timewatch.